Well, hello again, and thank you for joining me for another marvellous presentation. Recently, one of my subscribers, quite a young chap actually, contacted me and asked me whether I would like to try out a camera. And so yes, I gladly accepted the offer, and it arrived 2 or 3 days ago. And I'm glad to say, Dexter, that it's safe and sound. It is, of course, the RICOH GR Digital. It's one of the first generation of GR digital compacts before they dropped the word digital from the title. I'll be putting some images up over here for you to see in greater detail. But Dexter was sort of keen for me to try this and see if I could get anything decent out of it. He seemed to think it might suit my style of photography, and so this is just a trailer for that test, if you like, on the RICOH. But as soon as I received it, it's funny how your mind works, especially when you get past a certain age. And it's such a compact little camera, easily fits in the palm of my hand. First impressions, by the way, are that it's great. But I suddenly started to think, well, this is really a tiny camera by most people's standards. And my mind started to wander back over the many years that I've spent in photography, in all sorts of photographic environments, from retail through to having my own studio. And I thought, well, that's got to be one of the smallest cameras that I've ever actually been asked to use. What was the largest? And straight away your mind goes back to, if you like, conventional cameras. I'm talking pre-digital, obviously. And when I graduated from Instamatics to 35mm, that was the first big step. So a 35mm, the Yashica Minister 3, which I told you about a few weeks ago, was my first 35mm camera. I only bought a not even a more expensive 35mm camera. I actually bought a Zenith 3M because I thought that a single lens reflex camera would give me more flexibility and would give me suddenly much better photographs, which of course is bunkum, it's rubbish. Anyway, Yashica Minister 3, Zenith 3M, 35mm cameras, a variety of other 35mm cameras then followed, including the likes of Nicomat FTN, Minolta SRT 101, all sorts really. And then when I joined my local photographic society, there were a couple of senior citizens there who could produce the most stunning 20-inch by 16-inch black and white prints. And I was in awe of these guys. Suddenly 35mm was not going to cut it for me, had to be bigger than that. So the next step up in terms of format size was a 2¼ inch square, and the first one that I ever bought was a Yashica 124G, which nowadays go for absolutely crazy amounts of money. They're really very sought after, and quite rightly so. They're brilliant cameras, good lenses. If you find one in nice condition, go for it. Really good. So a 2¼ square. Could I get on equal terms with these guys that were producing razor sharp 20x16s? No, let's be honest, I couldn't. You go into in-depth conversations with, well, what film and what developer should I be using, and what do you use? And of course, some of them would give you very guarded advice. They wanted to keep their special brews private. But in the end, for me anyway, the best combination was probably Ilford FP4 developed in Perceptol. That seemed to work the best for me as an individual amateur photographer. And that really formed the basis of my introduction to serious amateur photography. For quite some time, I didn't keep the Yashica twin lens reflex for too long because it doesn't really suit my style of photography, a twin lens reflex. So I, like most people, invested in more up-to-date 35mm SLRs from the likes of Olympus and Nikon and Minolta. The Olympus OM1 I had when it first came out, because at the time it was launched I was actually working for a large retail photographic chain out of Chester, and I managed to get my hands on an early release before they brought out the motor drive version, and that was a lovely camera, the OM, with fantastic lenses, and it's quite rightly still very much sought after and respected today. So that was the sort of story of my amateur photographic career up until the point in the 1980s when I worked for a geological surveying company. This was at the height of the North Sea oil boom, and in particular one area of special interest to this company was the North Sea. So they would send geologists out to the North Sea, to the drilling platforms, and they would bring back core samples from the drills that go down into the seabed, and then those core samples would be photographed, and from the cores that they brought up from the seabed, the geologist would be able to tell whether there was oil deposits down there or not. And the company as a whole would then produce a complete report, including maps, for either the petrochemical companies involved, whether it was Shell or BP or Total, whatever it was, and sometimes even governments. And because these reports were talking about potential deposits of oil, they were A, very valuable, and B, they needed to be completely secure. So everything was done in-house. So the geologists would go, they would use their own little 35mm cameras to take on-site photographs in a very amateur way. Then when they came back, they would compile a report. The core samples would be shipped back, and it was part of my job to photograph these core samples. And that was the first time I got involved in using a 5x4 monorail camera. Now, if you haven't used a monorail, I'll be putting images up over here. If you haven't used a monorail, can be a nightmare. The one that I was given to use, and this was up in Aberdeen, they had like a store, a shed, basically a massive industrial shed full of these core samples, and it was freezing cold inside there. And they constructed like an angle iron frame with a sturdy table on which these core samples could be placed, and then the camera was up above by about 10-15 feet looking straight down, and it was my job to photograph these trays, which were flipping heavy, using 5x4 colour neg film, and that in itself was a nightmare of a job. heavy trays, dirty, going up and down a ladder 3 or 4 times to photograph 5 or 6 trays of cores, and I did that for 3 months up in Aberdeen before returning to the headquarters, which was in North Wales actually, not too far away. And I was part of the reprographics team, and a reprographics darkroom involves the use of a process camera. We actually had 2 process cameras at the headquarters. The smaller one, which hopefully I'll show you an image of over here, was a vertical process camera. So you would put your originals horizontally on the bottom. The head of the process camera would go up and down, just like an enlarger, but on a much bigger scale. The head of the process camera would go up and down, and your film plate would go in the top sheet, not plate. Your film sheet would go in the top. And that was used for photographing stuff up to about 20 by 16 inches in terms of the originals. Anything larger than that, then we had to use the big gun. And this is what came back to me when I was thinking about the little RICOH going from the sublime to the absolute ridiculous, because the horizontal process camera that we had was called a Little John, and there are a few images coming up here. And the Little John was so big that it actually occupied 2 complete rooms. The larger of the 2 rooms consisted of the rail of the bed of the camera, on which was the copyboard. And the copyboard was normally in the vertical position when it was being photographed, and you could place an original artwork in there. I think from memory it would have been round about 5 foot by 4 foot, something of that order. And it was sandwiched between a translucent panel at the back, then the original, and then a glass sheet in front, and then the whole thing was vacuum sealed. And that copyboard, which I'm hoping you can see from the images, could be illuminated either from behind. So if the original was like a transparency, you could illuminate it from behind, or more often than not, the lights would be placed in front, and these were massive, great tungsten halogen lamps which burned extremely hot. Not nice things. So that was and then the original could be moved either backwards or forwards away from the film plane, and once you got that set up and the vacuum was tight and everything, you could then go through into the inside of the camera, if you like, into the darkroom side of it, completely separate room, and in there you would have the folding down film plane, and that could accept 36 inches by 24 inch sheets of film, usually line film or something along those lines, usually very high contrast, because most of our work in there was done as part of the map making process. And back in the 80s, before it was all computerized, of course, you had draftsmen like the ones in this image here scribing away at originals, going off things like depth charts and aerial photographs and all the rest of it, and they would scribe these original positives. We would make a negative from it on this Little John process camera, and that would then be sent through to be prepared for plate making in the offset litho print department, which was also on site. So it's a major operation and very complicated, but the size of this Little John was quite breathtaking, really. And it brought back to me the difference, the huge difference between the size of the image making area on this little RICOH GR and the size of the image making area on the Little John. And I'm going to show you an image now. Perhaps just have a guess. You've got a RICOH GR here. If we put the sensor onto a sheet of paper, in my case it should be film, of course, we're talking about a process camera. If you were to put the sensor onto the 36-inch by 24-inch sheet of film in that Little John, how many images, how many sensors of this could you fit onto a 36 by 24-inch sheet of film? And the answer is there. And it staggered me, really, absolutely staggered me. And that just shows how things have moved on over the last sort of 40 odd years. Of course, all that side of image making, the reprographic side, has gone. It's all computerized now. You don't have draftsmen bending over light tables, scribing maps. It's all done by computerization. It's all been computerized, I should say. And the darkroom side of it, long gone. It was demolished and sold off or scrapped. But it was interesting technology, and so I just thought I'd treat you to this garbage, my interesting past. And it all started with Dexter sending me this lovely little RICOH GR Digital, which I'm going to be testing out over the next few days, and hopefully we'll give you a full test report in the next film. So for now, I'm going to say yet again, thank you very much for bearing with me and watching. If you got this far, blimey, you're a hero. And I will catch you next time. So stay safe, keep enjoying your photography. Bye for now.